quieting down, while we're quieting down, I'd like to ask for Valérie, Dr. Niall O'Day, Shauna Morgan Seeger, somebody who has as many names as I do. Seeger, Marie Fast, Jimmy Morgan, Julie Bushy, and Loretta Bayer. Would you please join me? Seemed like there should have been a smoother way to do that.
Perfect. Okay, which way are you going to go? Oh, there she is. There's Boucher.
Okay, Marie Fast.
Oh, there she is. She's right.
Thank you. Thank you. This will be a presentation of the work of the Joint Working Group. Please, let's give a warm round of applause to our first panel. Please know they are not being left to their own devices. I am stepping off the stage, but coming back so we can take some questions. Valérie's in charge. Thank you.
Bonjour, hello. Thank you for all being here. My name is Valérie Courtois. I'm the director of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. I'd like to acknowledge the territory that we're on of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'd also like to acknowledge the beautiful ceremony that we had this morning. Thank you so much to Frank and Kathy and the local nations and the Heiltsuk nations for that beautiful, beautiful ceremony and starting us in the right way. I'd like to tell you first the story so far and why we're here and how it is that we got here. Of course, many of us have been guardians and our nations have been guardians of the land for generations and eons, but there really has been a modern effort to formalize and have initiatives that are based in our nations fairly recently. Of course, on the coast of British Columbia and here in British Columbia, there's been much leadership in that vision. And I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of the Haida Nation, who had the very first modern Watchman program. So please give a one round of applause to the Haida Nation. The Haida's approach to stewardship indeed inspired members of my own nation, and I had the privilege and honor of working with the easternmost parts of the Innu Nation in Labrador, and I had the responsibility of being the forestry director and environment director and managing the Innu Environmental Guardians Program, or also known as Minashkwat Kanatu Tuatak. I have personally seen the transformative nature of what initiatives like this can do, not only in communities, but in particular in individual guardians, and what that does to finding a role in our community. In the Innu Nation, our men become men by hunting and being a part of the land. Our women are recognized as strong women by being able to provide and care for their families. In this modern day and age, that reality is not always easy. And for me, the structure and approach to guardianship is a way of thinking about good people within our community and a good role and a good life within a modern context. And so that's what personally really drives me to working and supporting this leadership effort. In early 2014, the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, along with its partners at Tides Canada and the Nature Conservancy, now known as Nature United, gathered existing programs and existing representatives not too far north of here in Squamish. And that was the first time that Guardians from across Canada had come together to talk about what they were doing. And there were three principal results of that meeting that came out, and three goals. The first one was to create a network, that by meeting and coming together, the Guardians realized that they were actually part of a much larger movement and could learn and share with each other. The second goal was to ensure that we were able to push for stable funding, in particular by pushing a partnership with the federal government, because of course Guardians are able to fulfill goals and objectives that are important for the Canadian government and Canadians in general as well. The third goal was to think about what should training and education look like, and how can we think about that through a national curriculum framework. So you'll see tomorrow a presentation that has explored that notion. After the Squamish gathering, and when we knew that there was a real desire for networking and to create a partnership with the federal government, we were lucky to have the support of the Assembly First Nations, and I'd like to acknowledge Chief Jean-Charles Pietachot and Chief Tammy Cook-Searson, who forwarded and seconded the resolution that supported this national movement at the Assembly of First Nations in December of 2015. So thank you very much for that. Shortly after, in 2016, we had the very first Indigenous Guardians gathering in Ottawa that many in this room attended at the Delta Hotel in downtown Ottawa. Last May, we had a workshop, a little bit more of a working workshop at the Lord Elgin Hotel in Ottawa. And the culmination of those efforts really has set the stage for what you'll be hearing about in terms of the work of the Joint Working Group. The Indigenous Leadership Initiative also approached the federal government and to highlight the opportunity and to quote Senior Advisor Miles Richardson, the gift to Canada that Guardians can be. And to the Government of Canada's credit, even though it wasn't quite at the scale that we were hoping for, we're going to get there, they dipped their toes and agreed to invest $25 million in a pilot program in the budget of 2017. Now, that pilot investment since that time has been separated into three different aspects. So one for First Nations, one for Inuit, and one for Métis. So this particular gathering is focused on the First Nations portion of it. We have also, as you've noticed, we've been acknowledging the presence of our Australian brothers and sisters in the room. You know, we've been very much inspired by their success in having a partnership with their federal and state governments in supporting their Guardians and Rangers initiatives. And I believe today that the investments from the Australian government at the federal level is $90 million a year, with $20 million going to Indigenous protected areas. We need at least that much, if not more, in this country to really realize the vision of every Indigenous nation and within what is now known as Canada having the ability to build their Guardians programs and be stewards of their lands as it is their right and their duty. I'd like to at this time acknowledge Minister McKenna's personal commitment to this partnership. When the budget was announced, we had the pleasure of going and being in with Minister McKenna afterwards, and we said we'd like to assist you in implementing this commitment in the right way. And Minister McKenna told us, you should hold the pen. And so this is the commitment and the nature of the relationship that we have with Minister McKenna. Now, the execution of that commitment hasn't always been easy. This is a new way for the Government of Canada to work on stewardship, and I'm sure that Dr. Niall O'Day will be speaking to that shortly. I'd like to now acknowledge the Joint Working Group. So you'll know that in the past summer, there was some investments that were made initially in existing Guardian programs, and I believe 28 programs in Canada received funding. Those decisions were made by the Government of Canada without our input into the design of that program. And so we met with the minister and said, this is not what holding the pen looks like. What holding the pen looks like is for our own people to be designing and determining what are the criterion, what are the indicators, and where these investments should be made in order to make the case for that bigger, more permanent investment. And this is the result of that effort. The Joint Working Group was formed in early September and is comprised of 8 permanent First Nation members and 4 permanent representatives from the Government of Canada from 2 different departments, as well as a team of ex officios and support people who've been working very hard to support the work of that Joint Working Group. So I'd just like to acknowledge them. The co-chairs who are here with us today are Loretta Bear from Norway House, Julie Boucher with the Canadian Wildlife Service, as well as, unfortunately, who's not here, Lada or Colin Richardson from the Haida Nation, James Morgan, who's here with us from the Gitniao, Ross Wilson, who you met earlier, who was presenting on behalf of Coastal First Nation. He's from Metkatla. Keith Christmas, who I believe is in the room, from Unamangi. Linda Dwyer Commandos, I'm sorry, Linda, from Kitagon-Zibi. It's a very great honor to have you on the committee. Greg Jador from Yalbukak First Nation on the island of Newfoundland. And Nicole Hardesty from the Decho First Nations. On the Government of Canada, we have Marie Fast, who's in front with you as well. Nathan Cardinal. Nathan, if you're in the room, he's over here. He's with Parks Canada. Stephen Purvis, who I'm not sure if he's in the room, with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And of course, Julie. So I'd like to just take this time to acknowledge their hard work. They've been working almost daily since September to make sure that the program is indeed Indigenous-led and co-designed by Indigenous peoples and the Government of Canada to achieve the objectives and commitments that we've set out through this relationship with the minister. So I'd like to give them all a very warm round of applause. So thank you very much for this time to present with you, and I will be back up here a number of times in the next couple days, and I really, really have to say that I'm excited to see the breadth and depth of participation here, and give a special hello to those who are watching online. We're sorry you couldn't make it, but you're glad that you're able to follow online. And please stay in touch with us. It is because of your own experiences and spirits and efforts that has inspired us to be doing this work. And so we need you and hope that you will continue to be a part of what is indeed a national movement. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Niall. I'm the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of the Canadian Wildlife Service, and it's a great pleasure to be with you here today. I should say, first off, I've never been called Dr. Niall so many times in my life. It is on my business card mostly because I try and have credibility among the many biologists with whom I work, but I'm happy to be called Niall and really happy to be here today. Just wanted to pick up on something that Dave Porter had mentioned in his remarks, and that is that it is clear that guardianship has existed since time immemorial in this place, and I'd like to acknowledge the Coast Salish people on whose territory we currently meet and thank them for welcoming us here. Also like to thank our Hiltsuk brethren for the really inspiring opening ceremonies this morning. It gave what I thought was a very important tone to the deliberations and conversations that we're having over these next couple of days. Likewise, also want to extend my appreciation to Elder Dave Courchen for his inspiring remarks this morning. It really does underline the value that this kind of initiative has, and I think as we explore how to do this together, and I will say the federal government is figuring out how to do this together, that we're really inspired in doing that by hearing about the direct value of these activities within specific communities, and the impact that it can have more broadly in Canada from the Canadian Wildlife Service perspective, from advancing, of course, wildlife conservation and territorial protection, but also, I think, more broadly from the perspective of advancing reconciliation. I would like to thank all participants who've taken the time to come here today to this First Nations National Guardians gathering from across many of Canada's regions and communities. And I know that people have come from as far away. I know Greg Jador is joining us from the Mapakek First Nation, quite close to where I grew up in St. John's, Newfoundland. And I know we have folks from virtually every other part of the country here as well. And that's a really great, I think it underlines the value and importance that people put into this initiative, and the dedication that's been shown in advancing it from the inception of the concept to where we sit today. We, I think, all know that the Guardians initiatives have huge potential, and in many cases have already proven this, and I think Val underlined some of the existing examples in Canada. I know that the Australian Indigenous Rangers recently paid a visit to Ottawa, and Dennis was there, and I think that really brought home the kind of value that this type of work at a greater scale can offer, and hopefully put a twinkle into the eyes of folks contemplating how to scale this up as to how we might do so as we move beyond this pilot initiative and look to make the case for longer term support. I think likewise having the example of the Australian Rangers is very encouraging in knowing that we're not alone in striving to achieve these kinds of outcomes, and can share lessons not just within Canada and within regions, but across the world in terms of how to get this right. As many of you will know, the Indigenous Guardians Pilot Initiative was established in the summer of 2018. And as Val has noted, that initial round of funding did come from the federal government direct to a number of existing First Nations and other Guardians programming or existing programs across Canada. And that, I think, gave value in the sense of allowing support to activities that were on the ground. But I think we were all quite eager then to move to the phase of doing this in a co-created model. And the working group, the joint working group that has subsequently been established, I think has provided that critical ability to have First Nations representatives sitting together with our federal representatives to help our federal counterparts both learn how to make this kind of program work, and to have the work of First Nations participants from across the country to craft a program that can serve the needs of a diverse set of communities. We see several benefits of supporting this kind of on-the-ground stewardship work through Guardians, not only for the environmental aspects like protecting and conserving biodiversity, including species at risk, but also the values that it does provide to Indigenous communities across Canada more broadly in providing a connection to land and valuable and stable work. Through the pilot program, we want to support Indigenous communities managing their traditional lands, water and ice in a way that's respectful and supports our Indigenous partners in carrying out that responsibility for land. We recognize that that will be a work in progress for us, and we commit to continue to learn how to do this better as we move forward. The joint working group, we hope, is best placed to ensure that that representation is at the table and that those who best understand and can articulate the unique needs of First Nations communities are involved in doing that. Valérie and I oversee the work of the joint working group, but it's really the members of the joint working group themselves, the coordinators at the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and the Guardian Secretariat that are making this vision a reality. As Val's noted, they've invested countless hours in designing a program that will bring the best of the Guardians to First Nations and to the whole country. And their dedication to this pilot initiative is evident through that effort. The Joint Working Group worked extremely hard over the fall and winter and has produced some great results, and you'll see that in the coming few days. In a few short months, they've been able to develop a program delivery method, eligibility and assessment criteria, as well as the education and training components, not to mention the design and implementation of this gathering. Their leadership in moving forward this initiative based on shared priorities is very significant, and I certainly wish to offer them every best success in their progress moving this initiative forward. I know that despite any challenges that have presented themselves or any that will arise in future as we progress, the members of the Joint Working Group and we in our mine and Val's roles as oversight are committed to making this pilot a success. And I know that our mutual dedication to that will greatly contribute to taking us to where we want to go. And Environment and Climate Change Canada is steadfastly committed to working to make this work. And what we want to do is ensure that this pilot initiative, which doesn't exist on its own, has the opportunity to make the case for that longer-term stable support from both the federal government and hopefully from other organizations as well. I would say that the pilot initiative is one place where guardianship activities are happening, but more broadly in our work to advance Canada's nature legacy, we see opportunities in the space of the Nature Fund more broadly, so in the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas, in work we're doing to conserve species at risk, both on land and in the oceans, and we look forward to continuing that work and to incorporating concepts of guardianship in that activity as we move forward. Much remains to be done, but based on the current track record, I think we'll see much more success in the years to come, and that's in no small part due to the enormous work that the Joint Working Group has done. And with that, I will pass over the floor to Shauna Morgan, who will speak more to the initiative itself. Thank you very much.
Move that down for myself. Wajay, everyone. Anamaki gavitewi dang disnigas. And I'm so happy to see all of you here today. I'm going to be presenting on some of the work that the Joint Working Group did to create the eligibility and assessment and the structure of the First Nations Guardian Initiative Pilot Fund. It's a little bit of a dry topic. So I thought maybe to start it off, I would start by telling you a brief story. My whole presentation is going to be about 15 minutes, and no need to take notes, because if you check your participant package, you will find that a lot of the information that I'm going to present on the fund is included in the summary of the eligibility and assessment criteria. So with that, I wanted to ask you, how many of you have been called by the land and the water, called to come? The first time I heard the call, I was 18. Halfway through my first year of university. It was January, many years ago. and I heard the call, or I saw the vision. I could see myself sitting on the high banks of the Rupert River, looking west at the setting sun, and that's when I heard, headed to my First Nation, Waskaganish Cree Nation, on the southern shores of James Bay in ECCC. A few years later, oh, there's where Waskaganish is. A few years later, I heard the call a second time when my Uncle Billy, who was talking about at the time they tried to stop Hydro-Quebec from damming the La Grande River, which is located right there. He was talking about the court case when the EU put the elders on the stand, and they talked about important fish habitat where Hydro-Quebec wanted to build the first dam. And the elders said, don't build the dam there. That's spawning habitat. You're going to ruin the habitat for all the fish that feed us. And Hydro-Quebec put their scientists on the stand. Well, the judge believed the scientists, and the dam went in right where the elders said it shouldn't go. The end result of the Hydro-Quebec La Grande projects was the result of flooding over 1 million hectares of lands. And that flooding caused the vegetation to deteriorate and released huge amounts of mercury. That made the fish inedible. To all the EU that lived on those banks, and I still remember when I lived in Waskaganish, the people sending fish to their relatives that live further north. So at that time, when Billy was talking to me, he said, we need our own scientists. We need our own people to speak that language so that they can corroborate what the elders are saying. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, I really like plants and animals. And I thought, maybe I'll get a science degree. I liked it so much, I got 2. So I'm sure many of you have heard the call and answered that call to care for the lands and waters in your own way. The First Nation Guardian Initiative Fund is another answer to that call, supporting Indigenous guardians to speak the language of science and use those tools, and to speak our truth in a language that they can comprehend. But more importantly, it's about elevating our Indigenous knowledge, valuing and teaching the Indigenous ways of knowing, and that is at the very heart of this work. So, I wanted to start by saying that the fund structure and tools were developed by Guardians for Guardians. And I forgot to mention that I was an ex officio member to the Joint Working Group. I'm the operations manager for the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and so I helped to support the Joint Working Group members to develop the fund structure and the eligibility and assessment criteria. Collectively, the Joint Working Group members have over 100 years of experience from the perspectives of managing initiatives and networks to carrying out the boots-on-the-ground Guardians work. So we had a really experienced team of people that were putting these things together for you all. And we had First Nations with experience from coast to coast to coast in a variety of ecological, social, cultural, and economic contexts. Most importantly, we worked in a good way. We asked for spiritual guidance that was needed to bring what was most important to our attention so that we could make it our intention throughout our work. The Eligibility and Assessment Criteria Committee was tasked to do 2 things. First, to articulate the fund's goals and to develop the fund structure and the tools for First Nation Guardians, the First Nation Guardians Initiative Pilot Fund. Throughout the process, 5 principles helped to guide us. The first was to prove the Guardians Network and develop a business case for the National Guardians Initiative Fund beyond 2022. Secondly, to support First Nations at all levels, from those without initiatives, to those just getting started, to those with established initiatives, and those with emerging or established regional networks. No easy task. To create the opportunity to access an important amount of funding an appropriate amount of funding, and for an adequate length of time to demonstrate environmental stewardship as well as the social, cultural, and economic well-being. To identify the submissions with the best chance of success to achieve the goals of the fund. And finally, to create tools and processes that would allow this fund to start flowing funds to successful applicants by the end of June or sooner if possible. We also aimed to be thorough so that the selection committee would have an appropriate amount of information to make the difficult decisions on eligibility in the context of limited resources. We also wanted to keep things simple so that they weren't too onerous or time-consuming for those that choose to apply for the fund. And we wanted to minimize the intrusive questions that might require the submission of any sensitive information. So the fund goals are to give First Nations greater responsibility and resources to manage their traditional lands and waters and facilitate partnership with First Nations in monitoring ecological health, maintaining cultural sites, and protecting sensitive areas and species. To benefit shared natural and cultural heritage and grow economic and social prosperity. And finally, to produce measurable change for individual guardians, First Nations, guardian networks, and Canadians sharing in the bounty and beauty of the lands and waters under the guardian stewardship. So, there were 3 fund categories that were developed. Oh, I don't know how to go back. There's a slide that's missing here. It should be the one with the fund structure. Thank you. The 3 fund categories were developed. Tier 1 for new initiatives, Tier 2 for established and emerging community initiatives, and Tier 3 for established and emerging regional networks. Detailed guidance will be provided in the applicant guidelines. And I want to emphasize that these are guidelines, not rules. The applicants will use their best judgment to determine which pre-designated tier best fits the initiative scenario that they are requesting funding for. So for Tier 1, the criteria which are for the new or informal community-based initiatives. The applicant does not have any paid staff dedicated to lands, waters, or natural resources. The applicant may or may not have members who are active on their traditional lands. The applicant does not formally monitor ecological, social, economic, or cultural indicators of their lands and waters. However, some informal ad hoc monitoring may happen. And finally, the applicant has no formal mechanism to regularly provide information regarding the current state of traditional lands and waters to First Nation government decision-making. However, some informal ad hoc mechanisms may be used on an as-needed basis. Oh, sorry, I forgot to be pressing these things. I should have just had them all fly up at once. Oh, pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So within Tier 1, there will be an annual proposal intake, and you can reapply multiple years, but funding in 1 year is not a guarantee of funding in subsequent years. There is a maximum allocation of $60,000 per year per proposal, and work plans will need to be completed within the fiscal year that the funds are awarded. The total available for the Tier 1 Guardians group is, for the 3 years, is $1.8 million, and a total available annually will be $600,000 per year. So Tier 2 is meant to support the established and emerging community-based initiatives, and here is an overview of the criteria for the established community-based initiatives. Within the applicant guideline, there's separate criteria for the emerging community-based initiatives, and of course, there's a lower threshold for those emerging initiatives. You don't necessarily need to meet all the criteria in a given tier that is selected for your application, and I'm repeating myself here, but these are guidelines, not rules, meant to allow each applicant to self-select the category that best fits them. So the first one is the applicant has dedicated, formally recognized guardians. The applicant has formal mechanisms for educating, training guardians in Indigenous and/or Western knowledge. The applicant has formal monitoring programs of lands and waters. The applicant monitors information regularly that supports First Nation government decision-making. And the applicant's guardians engage with other land users for the development and development proponents, researchers, and other levels of government for strengthening decisions at all levels. And finally, the applicant has existing partnerships and is leveraging funds. And finally, Tier 3. This is an overview of criteria for the established regional networks. And once again, there is a lower threshold for emerging networks. The applicant can demonstrate a commitment to work with other communities or First Nations in the region, and each member First Nation has dedicated guardians that work on their traditional lands and waters. The applicant works in partnership to provide a network, the applicant works in partnership with a network to provide formal mechanisms for training and educating land staff in Indigenous knowledge and Western science. The applicant has formal mechanisms to monitor traditional lands and waters of the network members. The applicant shares equipment and other resources with member First Nations and also has formal agreements with members to support the sharing of resources. The applicant works with the network members to develop annual work plans or portions of their annual work plans, and monitoring information collected by the network supports collective First Nation government decision-making. And finally, the network engages with other land users, development proponents, researchers, and other governments, strengthening decision-making at all levels. So thank you for wading through all of that really dry text. The reason I wanted to have you have a chance to see some of this is because this will be your opportunity to ask the joint working group members questions about the fund. And so I wanted you at least to see that, and I don't know that everyone had a chance to read through the document that you were provided in your package. So I'll just talk a little bit more about fund structure, and then we'll be wrapping up. I feel like I'm missing the structure for Tier 1. Well, I'll start with Tiers 2 and 3, but oh, that's right. Thank you. I forgot, Val. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, so for Tiers 2 and 3, the structure is similar. We have 3-year proposals. So we'll be asking for multi-year proposals, not annual proposals. And the total amount available for each tier, for Tier 2, there will be $2.9 million, and for Tier 3, there will be $2.9 million available for the total 3 years. The submissions will be evaluated against similar initiatives within each tier. So for example, in Tier 3, established networks will be evaluated against other established networks, and emerging networks will be evaluated against other emerging networks. And the idea, again, is to try and make sure that we have representation from all the different types of places and levels where folks are at with their Guardian programs. So you'll also notice that Tier 2 and 3 are for that 3-year funding block, and that's because we heard from Guardian managers that stable funding over a long period would unlock their initiative's true potential, making it easier for staff to maintain staff and conduct their monitoring, research, and work throughout all seasons. This 3-year block of funding also provides a greater level of certainty, making it easier to leverage these funds in order to access other funds. And of course, this means that there will only be one intake for tiers 2 and 3 in this pilot phase. Sorry, I pressed too soon. In all cases, the expressions of interest and proposals will be selected from the best submissions and those with the best chances of success to achieve the goals of the fund. So now to talk about the next steps. The eligibility and assessment criteria guideline application, the Tier 1 proposal, and the Tiers 2 and 3 expressions of interest will be emailed out to everyone that we have email addresses for this Thursday, March 14th. Others will be able to request these documents from the Indigenous Guardians website, which I'll provide to you momentarily. So Tier 1 proposals, their intake will start this Thursday, March 14th, and they'll be due in 3 weeks, on Friday, April the 5th. So this is a very short turnaround, I know. And we've tried to streamline the proposal process as much as possible to accommodate this very short timeline. Successful Tier 1 applicants will be informed in late April, and we aim to have contribution agreements completed by the end of May 2019. Oh, sorry, I did it again. You can just backtrack. Tier 2 and 3 expressions of interest, the intake will also start this Thursday, March 14th, and be due 2 weeks later on March 29. I know, 2 weeks, it's very tight, and we've taken this into consideration by making the expression of interest, again, as streamlined as possible. The Joint Working Group Committee was working all weekend to make it even more streamlined. So the all completed EOIs for Tier 2 and Tier 3 will be submitted and evaluated, and successful Tier 2 and 3 EOIs, or expressions of interests, will be invited to submit proposals on Wednesday, April 24th, and they will be due in approximately 3 weeks later on May the 17th. So I've said it more than once, these are very tight timelines, but based on the experience of the Joint Working Group committee members, they believe that it's possible to get the EOIs and the proposals in within the timelines laid out. There's more reasons to why we want this tight timeline. First of all, it's going to allow the funds to start flowing by the end of June this year. And that's really important for the Tier 2 and 3 initiatives. And the reason being is because of the 2019 field season. We want to make sure that you actually have the money to get working in 2019 to do your work. Finally, this tight schedule also avoids any potentially lengthy delays that a federal election may impose on the development of any contribution agreements. So finally, the website will contain basic information, and as I've said, you can request these guidelines and templates to be emailed you from the website starting this Thursday. I know that was a lot of information to absorb in this presentation, so if there's any questions, myself and the other Joint Working Group members would be happy to provide any answers that, to those questions at this time. Miigwech.
Thank you. Thank you to the Joint Working Group for their presentation. We have lots of time for questions and comments. You notice that you don't have any microphones down on the floor. We do have individuals with microphones that will dash around to, good thing they're young, dash around to wherever you are. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. And when you get a microphone, please stand and give us your name and where you're from. We have this, Maxine.
Hi.
Oh. Scared to hate Hey, Bev.
Do you deliver funds in British Columbia?
Do you want to, should we take a couple of questions and then come for a response, or all at once?
Depends on how long the questions are, I suppose. That's a short one.
Okay, that's a short one, so who? Shauna? How do we call these microphones?
Yes, you mean for this particular Guardians Initiative pilot funding?
Yes.
Yes. It's open to all Indigenous people, First Nation, pardon me, all First Nation people across Turtle Island.
Thank you. In the back?
Hi, my name's Ken Paul. I'm with the Assembly First Nations fishery sector. With respect to the Tier 2 establishment for emerging community-based initiatives, one of the criteria was Guardians engage with other land users. What would that look like in a marine setting?
Thank you for your, hello? Thank you for your question. I think that when we were preparing the criteria, and that we used water and land interchangeably, because we recognize that guardianship is required in both the sea, the inland, the waters, the rivers, the lakes, as well as the lands.
And I'll just add to that as well, that if, for instance, your initiative didn't interact with any other folks out on the lands, that you can ignore that criteria, because again, you're going to be self-identifying and you don't have to address every single criterion. You choose which one fits best for your initiative.
I hope that answered your question, Ken.
Thank you. There must be more questions out there. Over here. We have two over here.
Hi there. We were curious, is this funding available for individual nations or is it for aggregates? And will aggregates be weighed more beneficially than individual nations?
So the funding is available for individual communities as well. You'll recall from the presentation that there was a network component as well too. So individual communities for Tier 1 and Tier 2, and then 2 and 3 is also available for networks, right? 3 is for networks. So 3 is for networks. Sorry for being confusing. Tier 1 and Tier 2 is available for communities, individual communities. Tier 3 is for networks, groups of First Nations that choose to work together.
Thank you. Right here?
I am Brian Holmes from Spuchwin, the interior by merit. And just kind of in relation to that question was, so within the same nation, can an individual community apply along with, on a nation level, at the same application, the 2 different applications, you know what I mean? For like a Tier 1, is that possible, or does it have to be one or the other?
Maybe I can start to answer that question, and maybe Shauna would like to add to that. The idea is that the program wants to sort of encourage the building of nationhood, as Valérie would like to say. So, of course, the tiers are divided along the lines of Tier 1 for individual programs and then Tier 3 for networks. To not have them compete, but also to encourage those that are sort of becoming networks to apply together. And if you notice, there are way more funds available for Tier 3 than, for example, for Tier 1. So I would say it's not because they're going to be discriminated against if they're applying both, but the goal would be to try to avoid the double dipping, if you will, but instead encourage the building of these networks, these regional networks that are going to lead to better nationhood. So.
So the answer is no. You could apply as a Tier 2 if you're an established or emerging community-based initiative, or even if you're in a Tier 1 where you don't have a program but you're just starting to be a part of an emerging or established network. So you could apply to Tier 1 or Tier 2 even if you're part or joining a network that is also applying. But the other thing is, of course, this is a small amount of money. It's a pilot. And so one of the things as well we're going to be looking at when the joint working group is going to be evaluating the submissions is, you know, the geographic distribution of the funds as well, because we want to be able to you know, make sure that we have examples of how this fund can help in a variety of contexts. So as long as the community-based initiative is not applying for the exact same work as the network, you know, that it's separate from what the network is applying to do, then I think that, you know, you could take your chances and submit.
Yeah, because it's going to be like, for example, seven communities, but over a broad range from, you know, Colville all the way up to where we're from, and having different initiatives in different areas. We're in the Nicola Basin, and the Okanagan is over there, but we're still part of the same. So the initiatives within the nation are going to be different. So I could see applying for different, but as long as the work is different.
Is different. As long as the work is different. And Loretta, do you want to add?
And I think too, one of the things that we're going to have on our website is a list of other funding sources that could also support specific initiatives that you can also apply for, because we recognize that our funding source is very limited, and the activities that various communities want to carry out will meet other criteria and other federal programs perhaps, but we'll provide a very succinct list for you to look at as well too. So don't ignore that link. Pay attention to it and be able to be a creative in how you apply for your funding and spend your funding.
I just want to speak to the nationhood issue, and you know, the whole idea of this pilot is to set us up for a much longer term investment. That we want to have the Government of Canada and other partners really invest in what this is. This means that we have to demonstrate the success and the ability of these programs to genuinely reinforce our own nationhood and our own responsibilities to land. So this is why this approach is a little different than what we're used to in terms of the delivery of programs and with the Government of Canada. In fact, we insisted that this not be just another program. This is a way for us to build that case. And so this is not going to be an opportunity for you to rely on this fund for all of your needs in terms of what your wants and desires are, but it is an opportunity to think about catalyzing what you're already doing and being able to do that within a way that we're going to be able to measure the impacts of that work. And so just to kind of frame that nationhood piece, this is really about strengthening that nationhood. If you are multiple programs within one nation, the idea, and we know this is part of what we've been doing and what we've been hearing both from the Joint Working Group members as well as through the gatherings and the workshops, that there are great advantages to coming together as a nation within these programs. And that's part of the goals that that the working group was trying to balance in the design of this fund. And so just to complete your question there.
Thank you. We have one in the back, and if the mic could move over to the gent in the gray. In the back?
Hello. Yes, my name is Paul Seaver. I'm from Deedot First Nation, and I've been working as a natural resource manager for about 4 years. And it's basically a one-man position right now. We currently have a Guardian program within the Parks Canada West Coast Trail Unit, protecting our traditional sites within that park area, but we want to expand that to our whole traditional territory. And we also have a small fisheries program that we want to start monitoring on the water activities. They're two separate programs right now and very poorly funded. And we also have a strategic land use plan that covers our whole traditional territory, and our Nitnat land use plan, which covers the Nitnat watershed that we want to protect. So I'm trying to pull this all together, and would our programs be qualified as Tier 2? But I want to try to pull all these components that we already have together. We have existing funding for the fisheries, and we have existing funding for from Parks Canada, but it's seasonal decisions.
Sure. To me, it sounds like it is a Tier 2 program, but again, it's up to you to decide which one you feel fits best for what it is you want to do.
Well, we want to protect all our resources within our territory, which we have identified in our land use plans. It's both land and we've actually had some traditional use studies on our marine studies too. So, like, we want to protect the whole territory.
So I guess some of the questions that I would ask myself if I was filling out the application for you is, are your intentions to work with different groups within your territory, or is it just one group working to expand its own program? And I think that's the most important thing. If it's just one group working to expand its activities, you'll fall within Tier 2. But if your intention is to partner, if you will, and to expand your activities to multiple groups to work together on the territory, then you become a network or an emerging network as part of Tier 3.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we plan on trying to work with our neighbors, the Macaws, across the water in Washington State and Pachita, but that's not going to happen right away. So, like, I want to get an established program under Tier 2 before we can move forward.
To me, it sounds as though you're talking about an Indigenous protected and conservation area. I'm not certain if that's what you want to achieve for your geographic area. No?
We're currently going into we're signing an agreement in principle pretty soon, and we're going to be negotiating fisheries issues within our territory, Juan de Fuca Strait and offshore waters. Our elected council is currently concerned about all those issues, but there's really right now there's no enough staff and a concentrated effort to organize this, and basically it'd probably be up to me to start, and I would say that's eventually where we want to go is to work with our neighbors and protect a larger area, but for now I gotta get a basic program done and pull what we have together, and so we can move forward in that direction.
Yeah, not to exhaust this answer, but certainly that's exactly the idea of this program, is to address those realities, is to make sure that by creating these linkages and building our nationhood, we're able to address those very kind of situations and work and build together. So that's the beauty of this program. Just to add to that, thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. And over here.
Hello. Suzy James Marluzo li Lutzakets ST. The nurse course in Nabatulere, the Sambatha Lasi, Harsicho. A night in a Thenagatala Nade. Itlastene ko a betetio. A Sambatha la Sidi Hai Ha Betati Satelo. A Dati Sambatha la Si. Plantenu ko Bako, you Canada ke Yakoba. A nurse curse ye. Ka. Merci. You understand? Okay, my name is James Marlowe. I'm from Lutzake, Northwest Territories. Sit on I think the Nene Parks Committee. Well, most of you probably heard that we just had a ratification to establish a national park reserve in our territory. So in May, we have a big celebration and a signing ceremony with the minister and all the government officials. So my question was, first of all, I'd like to thank you for all the money that you guys are going to provide for helping people out. And also, my one question I had was, can private individuals apply for funding, or you have to be part of an organization to get assisted for projects? The other one is the funding that you mentioned, is it for projects that are in summer, winter, fall, and spring, all year long, or just maybe summer? And the amount of funds you mentioned, is it for one organization or all of Canada? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And you're thanking, I guess, the federal government for putting forward funds, but miigwech to all of you who are doing the work on the ground, because really that's what's important. So to answer your question, the eligibility for this fund is directed towards Indigenous organizations, Indigenous governments, Indigenous-led activities. So as long as it's an Indigenous organization that's applying, it's eligible. So it could be an individual applying for an activity occurring in their community. That could also work. Of course, through the proposal stage, you will be asked to provide an indication of support so that you're not working alone. So hopefully that answers your question. As for the funds are directed not necessarily to one community, but are for the entire of Canada. As Dr. O'Day, Niall, mentioned earlier, the fund has been, if you will, somewhat divided between Métis, Inuit, and First Nations, just to allow them to be able to meet their own needs and to respect the distinct nature of their activities. But each fund then are directed towards all the nations as part of that Indigenous groups. So the money that's provided for First Nations is for First Nations across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one more.
Kui gatno ta hiu kui Mr. Bogatno ka kinin ai mutan min tot senten ne kawawi trano Mr. Patan mi kwat ninan mayunan et when maji Mr. Himiat Mr. Wertone ne. Oui, Valérie. Traduction, Valérie. Je vais parler à la langue seconde que je parle la langue seconde parce qu'on y est par obligation, mais j'aurais tellement aimé m'exprimer dans la langue Innu, d'ailleurs qui est la plus belle au monde. Et moi je suis pour, compte tenu j'étais celui qui a proposé la résolution, mais de reconnaître ceux qui l'ont déjà été dans le domaine, les gardiens, juste confirmer que c'est un besoin pour les communautés ou pour la nation, peu importe. Et j'aurais aimé, est-ce que le site va être disponible en français pour nous là-bas? Comme je vous dis, nous, c'est la langue seconde, là, je ne prétends pas la défendre, là, mais sauf que pour les moyens d'aujourd'hui, je m'exprime dans la langue seconde. Ça, c'est une chose. Puis, en tout cas, on a beaucoup d'intérêt. On a un intérêt à continuer le lien qu'on a eu avec le territoire pendant des millénaires, mais quelqu'un est venu nous dire « Je peux faire mieux que vous, là. » Mais c'est un désastre à date, la façon qu'il a géré, peu importe le domaine. Moi, je peux parler pour les oiseaux migrateurs, je peux parler pour le saumon, je peux parler pour le caribou, pour les... Nous, on est près d'un archipel qui est géré par le fédéral. Puis d'ailleurs, c'est une des lacunes dans notre communauté, c'était de pouvoir être plus présent. Mais c'est une gestion qui est fédérale au moment où on se parle. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Merci, chef Pietachot. Alors, si je comprends votre question, est-ce que vous demandiez si l'information va être disponible en français ou en Innu? Parce que c'est certain qu'on se doit. Alors, toute l'information sur le site Internet va être disponible dans les 2 langues officielles, ainsi que l'information qui va vous être envoyée via courriel le 14 mars va aussi être disponible dans les 2 langues officielles. On s'excuse un peu aujourd'hui pour le rassemblement. C'est certain que la majorité de nos participants sont anglophones. Alors, ça se passe plutôt en anglais. Mais j'invite tous ceux ici que leur 2e langue est le français et s'ils veulent s'exprimer en français, il n'y a pas de problème pour répondre à leurs questions. Alors, on va pouvoir vous fournir toute l'information en français et l'information sur le site va être disponible en français aussi.
Just to provide a quick translation for the rest of you in the room who are not benefiting from headsets here, Chef Jean-Charles Pietachot, who is the proposer of the resolution, just reminded that and confirmed that there is indeed a need for this support, for the federal support, and there's a hunger for the accessibility of these funds. And he asked the question if things would be accessible, if the application would be available in French, because as those of you may all know, that for many of the First Nations in Quebec, French is the second language as opposed to English, and so we've confirmed that indeed these materials will be emailed and available on the website in French. So just a quick translation for the benefit of you all in the room.
Thank you. And we have a question here, and we'll go over there, and we have a couple more on this side. So here, please.
Hi, my name is Kevin Cook, and I work as a fish and wildlife biologist with the Gitniao Fisheries Authority, which is the technical arm of the Gitniao Hereditary Chiefs. My question is just, what can the funds go to support? Like, can they go towards capital costs, equipment, trucks, snowmobiles, etc., or any kind of office costs, like shops for equipment, or is it just geared towards labor, etc.?
I don't want to take over the joint working group answering. So to answer your question is the way the program is set up, the pilot initiative, is that it can cover salaries, human resources, it can cover training, education, as well as equipment and capital assets. What it cannot cover, for example, is funds for land purchase. That would not be covered. But the rest of the activities, the fund is quite large in the activities that are eligible under it. And if you visit our website, we don't have an exhaustive list, but a pretty good list that gives you an idea of all the activities covered within the program. Oh, sorry, it's been taken out. It's now in the applicant guideline, which you will receive in the email. Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you. Over here.
Thank you. My name is Finn. I am the Dene Nene manager for Hluay-Chotue First Nation in Northeast Alberta. I have 2 questions. So the first is, you mentioned that you wanted to distribute these programs as broadly as possible across Canada, right? So do the nations that received money last year, do they stand a better chance of getting money again through this longer 3-year cycle? Or is the sort of funding that was distributed last year sort of one time and off the table? How does that work in your guys' head?
I'm going to answer again, sorry. Yeah, we'd like to confirm the funding that was given last summer was just in order to get boots on the ground and to try to put money in the communities as quickly as possible. But those who received funding, it was very clear that funding was a one-shot deal and did not in any way sort of make them a better fit for the subsequent funding, because it was done outside of the bilateral relationship. And the entire goal of this pilot program is this creation of the bilateral relationship and working together so that this is an Indigenous program by Indigenous people for Indigenous people.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, there are a lot of ideas tossed around about, what a Guardian program is or isn't, and of course we understand that you're not going to sit on a stage and tell everybody that, but I would like to hear from the working group your guidance on whether these programs should be designed to facilitate sort of multiple outcomes, say species at risk, Indigenous conservation areas, say alternative justice, alternative sentencing, or do you prefer to see programs that are sort of laser focused on one particular issue, like impacts of mining, or how do you guys see that in your minds playing out over the future? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Finn. The ultimate authority for these programs is with the individual nations that have them. So it is up to those nations to design what it is for them and the suite of activities that is appropriate to their situation, their reality, their goals, and their objectives. So the expectation is in your application process that you will identify that you will express that. In fact, you'll see there's a number of questions that you need to answer that get to that point. And so we have to be really clear here. The goal of the national effort is not to tell you who you are or what you are to do. The goal of this national effort is to support your own sovereignty, your own nationhood, and your own design of those programs. So it'll be up to you to express that and to advocate for it in a way that will compel the Joint Working Group to support that vision.
Thank you. And we're over on this side.
Hi, my name is Robin Strong. I work for the Hacklock Community Forest in Lillooet in British Columbia here. I had a question about the eligibility of private companies. So I work for a forestry corporation that's owned by the band, and our revenue that we generate we've used to create the Range Riders program. So I was wondering if our company can apply or if it would have to be the band for us. Thanks.
As long as they, thank you for your question. I think that's an important question that many folks have around the room. As long as the company is a First Nation-owned company, as long as it's recognized as a First Nations company, and there will be a requirement for you to get a letter of support. And sometimes it's a BCR that you choose to get, or sometimes it's a letter of support. So either or, but as long as it's a First Nations entity, we would look at something like that.
Yeah, just as a reminder, though, that private company needs to be, that some of the eligibility and the way that you'll be assessed will be about how are you contributing to things like your own community's ability to make decisions on the lands. And so the activities of those guardians should be supporting that nation's own responsibilities with respect to that land, not necessarily addressing an own private company's own interest as a private company. So just a little nuance about that. Yes, you are eligible, but again, it's all about how your nation is structured, and in some cases, the management of lands is done through a private corporation, and in others, that's done through a Department of Lands within the band, and in others, it's done through an office in a nation. So the eligibility is there, and you'll be able to apply for that. But again, one of the ways that you'll be assessed will be about how does that actually contribute to your community or nation's ability to make sustainable decisions on lands and represent your own cultural responsibility to those lands and waters.
Thank you, Valérie. And if I can just add to that, the example, for example, of someone applying and saying, well, the program I'm designing for this community is going to hire all Indigenous members. But that doesn't work because the program is really built to be Indigenous-led and be grassroots. Because if not, it's not a long-term program. It has to be built within that community and be sourced from within that community in order to survive and to be planning for the long term. So just a nuance there as well.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, Lena Collins from the Weekend on Nation. Just for our nation, one of the things that we do when we do submit applications for any funding is we go to the community, get the input from the community in regards to what they would like to see happen, what's important, what's being impacted the most, and what we have to kind of watch out for. So I think it would be really important for the ones that are doing the proposal submissions is to put a call out to your communities when you get home and let them know where things are going for the guardians. And hopefully this only gets stronger is because we definitely need more eyes and ears on the land and on the water. Bye.
Thank you. Another one. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Jorgensen. I'm with Four Rivers with Matala First Nations Management in Northern Ontario.
Obviously, there's a limited amount of funds that are going across the country, so I was wondering if you'd be able to offer any vague guidance as far as individual allocations, just to try and, I guess, help us all focus as to what's a feasible range to undertake for our 3-year proposal. So I guess quantity of funding per year that's feasible for us.
Thanks for your question, Kimberly. That's a tough one to answer. We talked about setting ranges and saying let's set this range as the amount of money, and then that'll mean that we'll only get X number of applicants. But in the end, the Joint Working Group Committee decided not to put any ranges in, and to leave it up to each applicant to decide what is best for their initiative. Obviously, for the Tier 2 and Tier 3 initiatives, where you're looking at 3 years of funding, we're looking at 3 years, so it's imaginably going to be a larger proposal. But we don't want to limit you or give you guidance in that way, because it's really up to you. It's a small amount of money, though, and so it is going to be very difficult to make these decisions, and we want to make sure that it's an adequate amount of money that's going out to your initiatives, whether you're just getting started or you're part of a network. So all amounts will be considered, and I don't know if there's any other Joint Working Group members that want to add to that answer.
Thank you. Over on this side.
Thank you. Thank the Coast Salish people for allowing us to do business here today. I come from the rainforest of Vancouver Island in the Tofino area, Long Beach, where our hereditary chiefs and elders had stopped clear-cutting on Mears Island, which led to the Wanajus-Hilthawas Tribal Park. I guess my question is, in terms of submission, is it solely just the elected council, or can the hereditary chiefs apply to this? Shoot.
So we recognize that there are very many different governing structures across our country in all of the First Nations, and not all communities have elected and hereditary chiefs or leadership. So we are very flexible and accepting either or. Okay.
Hi. I just want to add to that too. It's as she said, not every area is different. Not everybody has hereditary chiefs. Some places have both band council and hereditary chiefs. But the idea there is, no matter who applies, they still need to have letters of support from both if they can. The more support you can show from your community is going to show that there's going to be success, and people will help that success move forward. And the idea is to showcase the best that we have, and that's why the process is a little bit crazy. It's a little bit swift, but it will result in the top groups moving forward, and from there it'll just roll down. So the more support you can show, the easier it'll be.
Can we have a mic here, please? This is our last question here.
Just had one more maybe for the group on the vision of moving forward with this group, and what is that vision? And I don't know if Ross had mentioned to it earlier, we don't want to record and report. We want the authority and the ability to work beside those that are enforcing and making sure those laws are done with our laws.
Yeah,
Maybe that's some pressure with the regional chief if he's still here.
Thank you very much for your question. You'll notice that the very last session on the agenda is all about the way forward. So I'm going to reserve the answer until that time, because then I'm going to steal the thunder of that presentation if I say it. But there is a way forward, and we totally agree with you. This is about regaining our authority and fulfilling our responsibility to lands, and that's exactly why the program is designed in the way it is, and why having strong proposals that speak to that vision and demonstrate how you are building your own initiative towards being able to do that will give you an even better chance of receiving funding. So that's exactly how it was designed, but we'll say more at the last session tomorrow.
Thank you. Over on this side?
Koi Tammy Cody Nidishnikas, Kirigan Zivinidonjaba. I just have a question regarding your tier and the fiscal funding. It says for tier 1 that funds have to be spent or the work has to be completed within the fiscal year. And I'm just wondering, like, because the funding will be flowed out only in May, and I'm wondering if it's possible to do that carryover of funds if it's not spent or the work's not completed by the end of March 31st.
Hi, sorry, this is a different mic. Is it still working? Okay. So the idea is, of course, preferably for the funds to be expended before March 31st. Although the funds will be received, if you will, or disbursed in May, they are, though, backtrackable to April 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year. So the activities could have started before you actually received the funding. The preferable approach is for the funds to be expended before March 31st. Unfortunately, we work in the federal process where we work on fiscal years. But there is a caveat that there is a possibility if the funds cannot be dispersed within the fiscal year, but that they are going towards the exact same activity that is going to happen past March 31st, we have an annex that we can add and amend the agreement to allow that group to expend the funds past March 31st. We don't love to do that because it's a lot of paperwork and complicated, but there's a possibility there, and the program allows that. For those programs in tier 2 and 3, well, then there's not a lot of issues because they're going to have a program that's going to be set in advance for the next 3 years. As of April 1st of next year, their funding will come automatically. Does that answer your question? Your question.
Thank you. I'd like to say, join me in thanking this panel for their good presentations and ask Ginger to come up. Okay, people, let's have a break. Come back in 15 minutes. We'll start again at 2:40. Thank you.